Hello, this is Cynthia Mazzaferro with Powerful Beyond Measure, and I'm delighted to have another fabulous author and a spectacular woman. Her name is Jennie Schut. How are you, Jennie?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited. I love your book and what we're going to talk about tonight. So let's get to it. I want to tell everybody a little bit about you before we start into your wonderful book. Jennie Schut is an award-winning artist and a teacher in oils and encaustics, a wax-based medium, in her home studio. She is the founder of Fly Forward, an organization that aids creative and spiritual exploration, awakening, and flourishing through educational materials, small groups, retreats, workshops, individual art instructions, and creative direction and leadership training. Since 2006, Jennie has conducted groups and retreats based on her material from her book, Waking Up Gray, an exploration of creative awakening. She has released her second edition and is now with Morgan James, the publishing house, which is also my publishing company, and has brought her book, her second edition book, to birth here, and we're going to talk about that. So really excited to have you here, and congratulations on your new release.
So much. It's been a real pleasure getting to know other authors like yourself and getting to know the family at Morgan James.
Great. Well, why don't you show everybody your book? Why don't you show up your book cover?
Yeah, here it is.
There it is. I love the hands with all the paint coming off of it. It's just amazing. Waking Up Gray. And I'm also an artist. So you're talking about both of us being an artist and both of us being an author. And so I think this is just going to be a really wonderful conversation. So why don't we start with what made you want to write Waking Up Gray?
I think it was my experience. A lot of my story is penned in the book. And I found as I began sharing my story out loud with people around me, I found that people were hungry for similar awakening. I had a creative awakening in my mid-30s. And every time I would sit down with a group of women and share what had been going on, a lot of deep and rich and profound stirring, right around that time in my mid-30s, every time I would share my story, there was this intrigue, this fire, this asking to wanting to be part of that. And so I looked at the needs around me and began penning my story. Now you have to understand, I never considered myself a writer. I got a C in my college creative writing class. And that was like, oh yeah, I can't really do this. This is not me. And I realized later that yes, it was me. I needed a creative environment, a creative inspiring environment, which I found in my home of Tennessee that I moved to. When I moved here from Ohio 25 years ago, I began to look around me and look for beauty. And that was really the first time I did that. I think I grew up in a geographical location where not a lot of beauty and aesthetic appreciation was around me. A lot of living was practical. Everything was practical. If there was a function, it was useful. If it didn't have a function, it didn't. It was really kind of extraneous and not important. So it wasn't.
That's so true, Jennie, because in life, it's how we see things that puts value on things. So even how we see ourselves, how we see our environment, how we see others, how we even see opportunities really can cloud. They can become gray and dismal and kind of routine, or we can tend to see the silver lining in them and actually see what is the magic here in this opportunity or this connection.
Yes, yeah. So as you begin to look under the surface of things, you find that there's a richness and a depth to even the ordinary and the mundane things in life. So when that world kind of opened up to me and I shared it with these dear friends around me, I realized I needed to put the story, my experience, my learning, all the things that I experienced onto the paper. And I began to write. And I would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes with ideas just going right at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I would get up and I would follow those. Whereas before that livening, that quickening in me, I may have gone back to sleep and just said, but I couldn't let myself go back to sleep. I had to get up and chase down this idea and write it down. And these became Waking Up Gray. And my story's in there. A lot of other people's stories are in there of creative awakening and just quickening. I mean, if all we have to do is scan our world for moments and find that there is just an inexhaustible source.
Right. So I know exactly what you're talking about, waking up when you're asleep, because to me, for me, it was the divine connection, the spirituality connection of a download of pertinent information that you needed to get to print to integrate that information. So yes, you had to take advantage of that divine inspiration, if you will.
Yes, and I really, really, really think that, and I know that you do a lot of work with this. I've read your things, seen your website, and I know that this is an important thing that you share, is all of the integrative pieces of what it means to be human. All of those different parts, they kind of bleed into one another. So when we're on a creative process, we're on a spiritual journey, we're on everything that makes us human, our imagination, our sensuality, our emotional life, our mentality, our intellectual energy, all of those things sort of feed into one another, overlay one another, and if one of those are somehow dormant or not functioning to its, like, you know, are not functioning fully, not, maybe there's been some injury, some woundings there. And if we can go back in there and be kind enough to ourselves to find some of that healing and go on that process, and you'll find that when you pick up one of those pieces of fragments of yourself that has been kind of laying there, kind of sleeping, you're going to pick up other fragments.
We're having a little technical difficulties. Every so often your voice goes in and out. So just go ahead and just speak a little louder, Jenny, when you do talk, okay? Sometimes the internet connections, when you do these videos, if it's not a high speed, all of a sudden it might be a tag behind. So if I find that happens, I might reiterate what we're talking about just so the audience, the viewer, can really get what you're saying. But I want to pick up on, you're right, there is a lot of overlap and blending of so many different self-help or transformational spirituality books. And one of the things I want to pick up with about yours, because I think it's really beautiful, is creativity. So could you briefly define what is creativity to you?
Yes. Creativity is such a big word. It's such a broad word. I think we typically think of creativity or artistry in our traditional sort of categorical ways of defining those. But I would challenge that and say that if you're listening to this and you think that you don't have, there's not a creative bone in my body, I think we've all heard somebody in our lives say that. I would really encourage you to look at that again and say that perhaps there could be some creative energy coming from you. If you're human, if we're human, we're creative. We make. It's what we do. If we're human, we make. So if you're in a place where you think you don't have any creativity to expend, look at that. And I would say even creativity is bringing order to chaos. So if you have the gift of organizing space, let's say that, for instance, okay, that's just one example of what maybe a type A personality would do, who would say, oh, I'm not creative, but I can organize meals and organize closets. That's creative energy right there, right?
Right.
You're bringing beauty and order to chaos. That is a creative act. And so part of what I try to do when people come to me, if they don't think they're creative, is wait a minute, let's pull forth, bring forth the places where you are creative. What are you doing? What feels creative? Let's call it forth and then look at it and turn it over, and maybe there's some exploration to do.
Right. And I agree with you, because I talk about, we all have spiritual gifts, and part of that gift is actually your creative expression of spiritual self, your passion, your deliverance of what you are, whatever you want to do. Doesn't mean you have to be a poet.
Painter, a dancer, all of
Yeah,
those.
it doesn't
Right.
have to be a profession or a mastery of that. Van Gogh never thought he was going to be a painter. And, his mother said, well, what are you going to be? Well, I don't know. And he says, I turned out to be Van Gogh. And so, we don't know we're going to be where we're going to meet and what pinnacle we're going to reach and trophy. We don't have to have that to evaluate our desires, our passion, and the reach that we can share with others in our gift, that we're sharing and passion that we're giving. And so I agree with you that creativity is really looking inward. And I'm going to go into this because it's something you're talking about in your book, and I want to ask you about this. So I'm kind of preluding this, that you talk about looking inside and finding that connection. And so my question to you is, Jennie, you talk about spending time, quiet time, rest time with the higher source. And if you refer to him as God, creator, universe, whatever you refer that name to be, why is that time important? And the information that you receive, how is that to be interpreted to the listener?
Right. Well, I think you even touched on it a little bit just a minute ago when you said that if you, let's see, what did you say? It just whoosh. Uh, if it matters to you and you alone, I talk about this idea of the audience of one. So you were saying earlier that if you don't have, you can be creative and you don't have to be a professional painter that has galleries on the wall, or a dancer in the whatever company. Um, if God alone, however you think of God, if He alone values your creative work, is that good enough? Is that okay? If He alone is the one. For me, when I wrote this book, I needed to write it privately. I needed to write it in a space of silence and solitude. I needed to hear God, and it needed to be something just between Him and I alone. I didn't want my audience in the room. I didn't want my husband in the room. I didn't want my kids in the room. It was just me and God. And it needed to start out that way. For me, it needed to start out that way so that it was the most authentic piece of work it could be. And then as I went through the editing process and I said, okay, this was for me first, me and God first. But now He's asking me to kind of put it out into the world. And so I can give it away. And I might need to edit it a little bit. I might need to save some spaces back for myself. Something, that maybe there was a process that happened in the writing that was just between Him and I. That creative process for me began with a healing process for me. It was just for me. And then it went out into the world. And it might go out into the world in a different form than it started out as.
Right.
But, okay, so I talk a lot about the process over the product. I'm hoping you can hear me okay. The process over the product. I'm all about the creative process. I don't really care what comes out at the end, the product that comes out at the end. I love to celebrate the product. I love to see the product when people bring things to show me. I love that. But I'm more about the process because the process is intrinsically important because it's relational. It's all about relationship with God, relationship with myself. And as I give it away, I have to I'm a painter, so I have to keep a piece to myself for a little while, live with it, process it. And then when I'm ready to give it out to the world, I can release it and let it go.
Yeah.
But I have to kind of protect that time between me and my process. And the product is just kind of this like, wow, okay.
Right. And so what you're saying, and I agree with this as well, is that it's the journey. You call it the process. It's the journey that is actually fabulous. It's empowering, it's inspiring, it's an awakening, it's a greater connection to self and to source and to really see your beautiful, divine, spiritual self and the gift that is, that you're at this moment transitioning, developing, birthing, whatever the word you want to use, and coming to that understanding that this is about you. This process, this growth is about you. And that, so often we always want to get to the finish line. And I often tell my clients and my students that the finish line is never a tangible line, because once you're there, you end up starting a new journey or a new task, and you really don't actually get to enjoy that finish line for very long. And I don't know about you, because writing my book too, when I eventually released it, I really felt, though, even though I was the author, it was really God's work through the book. And it was like, God, this is up to you how far it spreads, how many people read it. And that I had to give that away because I didn't really own the reach. It was, God is almighty. And this is a powerful exchange, just like he did with you, that it was born. And so just not stressing about how many books are being sold. Of course I'm promoting it and things like that, but it's like it has a reach beyond me. And I think that that's a beautiful place for each of us, not whether you're an author or not, to realize that we don't have to be responsible for whatever we're doing, whether you're counseling your children before they go to bed, the next day they go to school, that you're not responsible how the children are going to react, that you're there as an inspiration, like God inspires us, you're inspiring your children, but they have to learn. It's their journey, and you have to be able to give that away. So I love what you said.
Yeah, it's an invitation, I think. First, the invitation comes to me for whatever it is, or if you're a parent, the invitation is always there.
Right.
And so the people, whether you're a parent and you put the invitation out before your child, you can't really take up the invitation for them. They have to, they're the ones being invited. And so they have to take up the invitation. And so, it's like writing a book was an invitation. I remember hearing from God, I love the writing process with you. I want to write with you. It's an invitation. If you say no, I'm going to find somebody else who wants to write this work with me, but I'd really love for it to be you. And that felt like such a kindness. It felt like an invitation. It didn't feel like a demand or a duty or anything like that. It just felt like a kind invitation, and I wanted to move in that direction. And as we send it out, it's also the invitation, and we're not the person who sends the invitation, right? God is kind of sending out further. Yeah.
Yeah, and you say this in your book, and maybe you can talk on this. The same idea is, God's inviting us to do something, but that's because God, what does God see in us? And that what he brings to us through our struggles, even through our jubilation, through our opportunities, and even this invitation as you write it, it's God is trying to help you see your greatness, your potential growth, what you need to experience, what you need to share, reveal, all of these things. This is this opportunity that you're talking about, this invitation. And so what is your perception of what God does see in us?
I know that he sees so much more than ourselves.
You just went totally quiet on that silence. So you did it again. So
okay, maybe I'm not near my speaker. I don't know, but I think he sees so much more in us than we see in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I heard that.
Okay. I think he sees us in all our greatness, and we're first to see the darkness, right? The ways that we get angry with ourselves and harm ourselves. We don't love ourselves well. We don't know how to take care of ourselves. I have a whole chapter in my book about self-care, because it's this one thing that we don't give ourselves permission. We're taking care of others so much and so intently that we forget that we have to take care of ourselves first. It's kind of like that oxygen mask thing that the airlines always say. They say that for a reason. Like, that is how life works. You have to take care of yourself first. If you don't, you're going to pass out, and you're not going to be good for anyone else.
It's
So,
so true. It's so true. And
yeah,
I like to think of it as, we all have this light within us. And if we are going to be a beacon for others to shine the light upon the world, we need to see the light within ourselves. And so learning to self-care, learning to awaken to our own divine greatness, our own spiritual greatness allows us that permission, that invitation to then spread our light in whatever it might be. Could be that you're the best listener in the world, the best hugger, the best chef, whatever. Just being there, it's so important. And that we need to see our greatness, not diminish, and see how small we think we are, because it's
and
not the
I
size.
think the place where that comes from, I
Yeah.
think the place that we can really find that truth, and it's deeply true, the source that we can find that is in the silence when we hear God speaking over us. And part of the work of being in silence is that you're going to hear all the other voices that are really, really loud. Richard Rohr, a favorite writer of mine, calls these other voices wild beasts. And if you've ever heard of Anne Lamott, she calls them drunken monkeys, banshees and drunken monkeys. Okay, they're up here, they're in our brains. Everybody has them telling us these messages that are shameful, hurtful. They tell us that we're small and they diminish our power. Um, the only way we're going to allow the volume of those drunken monkeys to turn down is to be in silence and let God's voice kind of rise above all of that clutter of the band. And He's going to speak truth. He's never urgent. He's never demeaning. His voice is always, always, always a gentleman. He will.
Always gentle, compassionate, and loving. And I love in your book you quote many parts of the Bible, and beautifully ways for us to help. If you're into the Bible and you're looking for that deeper connection, it's a beautiful way to connect to different verses, passages, meanings that are very applicable and can be applied in your life. So I love that part. Can we go on a little bit farther into the relationship with faith and hope? How you feel faith is such an integral part in that recovery purpose, part of that self-discovery, that invitation.
Yeah, I mean, faith definitely plays a strong role in that. There's part of belief. Yeah. You have to believe some sort of foundational truth. There is goodness. Go after that takes faith. Um, and to be able to spend some time in the solitude and maybe because I feel like our culture is really loud and do things intentionally to make things loud. I remember taking a friend of mine several years ago. She had a horrible stomach pain, and I took her. It turned out she had to have her appendix out. But I remember waiting in the waiting room, and the waiting room wasn't very big. It's just a hospital ER waiting room. Uh, there were 4 different TV monitors up in each corner of the room. And it was a small enough room that you could hear each TV monitor. And every TV monitor was playing something different.
Oh
So I'm
gosh.
sitting there in the middle of the waiting room listening to 4 sound feeds and looking at 4 screens with different images on. And I
Bombarded.
just thought to myself, this is our culture. This is what we fill our lives with. And so to get into a place of solitude and quiet is countercultural. It's scary because I think we avoid that because once we've removed all of our sort of crutches, the things that we rely on to avoid pain, avoid wounds that might be kind of gaping wounds, we try to just kind of drown it out with. So why
Well,
would
and
we get
also
into
people are more
retirement?
people are more comfortable with these controls that society, cultural, family responsibilities have placed on us. And when you go into that quiet space, even though it's non-judgmental, it's loving, it's kind, it opens up a window, a doorway for you to expand, to be more, do something different than just being responsible for the routine, the normalcy of what life has become. And in that understanding of rising to seeing your greatness, it's fearful. And let's talk about fear. You bring that up in your book. How do we actually move through fear? Can you give us a couple simple examples of how you have found the ability to move through fear?
Yeah. Oh man, I've got all kinds. Every time I sit in front of a blank canvas or a blank page to write, you name it. There are some days where I can't scrape my body up off of the couch, and that's because of fear. If I try something, what if I fail? What if it doesn't work out? What if I don't have any more paintings in me? What if I don't have any more words of clarity in me? What if everything's gone? Like, that is a real fear. And it's really, really important to have a good friend who knows you well and knows those triggers. For me, I tend to isolate. It is really hard for me to reach out. When I'm in a place of being afraid, frozen, stuck, lonely, bored, angry, all of those things that we all deal with, I can isolate, and I've learned that I need one or two friends that know that I isolate, that know my patterns, to check on me. And I need to call them. And they've asked me, you need to reach out. You need to ask for help. That is the hardest thing for me. It has been so hard to reach out and ask for help. So they'll call me, they'll check on me. And I'm learning to call them, and I'm learning to ask for help. But that is a big, big, big one for me.
Right. And there's also times when I need to say, I don't want to write today, or I don't want to go and try to schedule something. And that's taking that realization that you need self-care. Instead of pressurizing you to do more, to paint more, to write more, to do this more, sometimes we need to do less to rejuvenate, to feel energetic. And then you come back and feel more refreshed.
Do you feel like you can tell the difference between those two? When you're needing to pull back, or when you're needing to dig in, even though it feels uncomfortable?
Yeah, because when I feel like I don't enjoy what I'm doing, then that becomes more of a do it responsible type action. And no one's forcing me to do that except myself putting on these demands. And sometimes I can find that I can pressure myself to do too much. I can be at the computer 8 hours a day if I needed, if I really wanted to. And I'm like, where's the balance in this? I did that when I was writing the book. I was working 12 hours a day, more sometimes. But I mean, now it's like, it's important for me where I am now to find more balance and to not quantify how good I am by how much I do. It's finding that balance in that inner harmony, and finding that that comfort zone within, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I think what you just said is so great. Not equating what we do with our value.
Yeah.
And that's part of, you were saying earlier how great it is when, we feel valued, we feel important, we feel needed when we're busy and we have all of these investments in our time and our day. But, oh man, if we can come to a place where we hear God speaking our value, apart from what we do, what we accomplish, but our value is intrinsic. It's not based on what we do. It's who we are. We're valued.
And if I could read my writing here, I wrote the quote that you have in your book, which I love. Our work is a gift, not a means to prove to ourselves, not a means to prove ourselves. So our work is a gift, and it's not the measurement of how we prove ourselves. And I think that's what we're talking about here is if we can choose to enjoy life, experience it, be in awe, be filled with all our senses and emotions, with whatever activity we're doing, that we can experience life in a much more fully way.
Yeah. You're talking about mindfulness, being present in the present moment without moving backward or forward, but really, really drinking in those moments and being.
But that's really our work, is our present. You know, what we're doing in the present, that's our work, whether you're painting, art, making meals, doing the wash, whatever, working. That's our work, which is really a gift. And our gift is the gift. It's not whether the gift sells or whether everyone loves our meal.
Right.
It's, you know, we're trying to be the light, that gift that we give, and that does not really necessarily qualify or quantify who we are. It just becomes the gift.
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's like you walk in the woods, right? If you take a walk in the woods and you look at the beautiful trees and all the things around you, no one's telling them how to be a tree. They just exist.
Exactly.
They're a beautiful tree. They're beautiful. And we humans, like, try to tell ourselves how to exist. We already exist. We're already beautiful to the master designer, whoever created all of this
Yeah.
stunning beauty.
I think that's so powerful. And each of the trees now saying to the other tree, well, you're bigger than I am, or stronger, you know. So that's another thing, is seeing our own uniqueness, our beauty within ourselves is such a very valuable skill for all of us to continue to grow and develop and really honor. So why don't you hold up your book again and let us know how we can learn more about you, where we can connect with you on your website, and again, where we can find your book.
Yes, it's called Waking Up Gray, an exploration of creative awakening. And you can go to flyforward.org and learn more about, something came up on my screen. You can learn more about my work at flyforward.org. And there's information there about groups, retreats, how to order your copy of the book. It's 10 chapters. I usually do this in 11 weeks or 9 months. I actually have done this in a church setting. I'm currently doing a couple churches now where we do it we start out in September and work it through May. And it's been fabulous. They do I have trained leaders that come in, they do the study, and then I come in on the off weeks and we do, I'll teach art, we'll do quiet journal days in between. And so we run it on a 9-month schedule. If you're interested in bringing it to your church, I would love to talk to you about that. I love that format. I feel like people can sit in the material, work through it. It's very journal heavy. Every chapter has 7 questions at the end so that you can take and really kind of dig in and ask yourself the questions that need to be asked.
That's great. Well, and having that self-reflection time is so important. That's when you get answers, and that's what we need, is answers so we can respond to that. And again, Waking Up Gray is available at any bookstore. If they don't have it, they're more than happy to order it. So you can call up your Barnes & Noble, whatever your bookstore is, say, do you have Waking Up Gray? And if they don't, say, will you order me a copy? And they can. And of course, you can also get it online at Amazon, all the online websites. So please go and check out, again, Jennie's great book, Waking Up Gray. It'll be a fabulous book for you, and also it's a great time for a holiday gift. So order yourself 2 copies. Do you have a parting quote or something you'd like to end on?
One of my favorite quotes is by Victor Hugo, who wrote Les Mis. And in Les Mis, he writes, "There is suffering in the light, and excess burns. Flame is burn and yet to fly. That is."
Beautiful. Well, on that, we're going to say thank you very much for spending time with us, and your time I know is valuable. And I hope you really enjoyed this conversation with Jennie, and I hope you would go and read her endorsements and her testimonies and reviews on Amazon or Barnes and Nobles, and really consider getting this book for yourself. It's a beautiful journey within, and finding that solitude time really awakens to your creative juices and opportunities. So thank you so much for being here, Jennie. And
So much. I admire your work too, Cindy.
oh, thank you very much. I appreciate you saying that. So happy holidays to all of you. Remember that the holidays is about peace. It's about joy, and it's about finding the spirit in all of us. And look forward to seeing you next Monday or next week with another author. And until then, have a beautiful, powerful day. Take care.